Hello and welcome to today's webcast, Accelerate Your Transformation Through Business Process Management. I hope that you're having a great day so far, and I'm very glad that you are taking the time to join us live on our webcast today. My name is Beatrice. I work as a field marketing manager at SAP Signavio, and I will be your moderator through our webcast today. I would also like to introduce today's speakers, my colleague Vanessa Lacontal. She's Value Advisor at SAP Signavio, as well as Managing Director and CEO from our partner BPMD, Peter Franz. Welcome. It's great to have you here. So before we begin, I would just like to give you some information on the structure of the webcast. It will last around 45 minutes to 60 minutes. We will use the remaining time at the end to answer your questions in line with the Q&A session. So please feel free to ask all your questions via the Q&A section in your Zoom control panel. We will try to answer as many as we can, and please do not use the chat button. Yes, so our webcast is being recorded. We are happy to send you that recording within the next days. And yeah, that's pretty much it from my side for now. With this, I would like to hand over to you, Peter. And I wish all of you a lot of fun, exciting insights, and I'll be back for the Q&A session.
Beatrice, thanks very much. And I'm delighted to talk to you all today about a subject that I feel very strongly about. And I'll perhaps describe in a little bit more detail why BPM is more critical than ever. It's not a new subject, but it's something that is very relevant today. And then Vanessa will show how BPM helps to de-risk and accelerate transformations, particularly using the SAP Signavio platform. And then we'll both go through some examples, some really practical examples of how this has worked in practice at some major organizations. So why BPM? Well, BPM effectively is about getting visibility of who does what, where, when, with what, whom, and why. And in a business, we need very close connections between all of these different dimensions that you see on the slide. And historically, we lived in a reasonably static environment where interactions between these different areas were well known. But now we live, as we know, in a world of change. Customers are requiring instant satisfaction. There's an ever-changing product landscape. We're living in a world where technology moves at pace, extending products and options that we have available to us, but also providing easy access to information on our competitors. And with reduced brand loyalty, we have an ever-changing environment where we need to keep pace with what the market's doing, what our customers are demanding of us. And then we live with ever-changing supply chain dynamics. And sourcing from various parts of the globe happens with different needs. Within the global economy, that's also in flux. And these are just a few of the areas that effectively highlight the fact that change is the normal. And so we need a new approach to provide real-time access to the way that we work. Sorry, not yet, Vanessa. And we need to be able to work with one source of the truth, to easily adapt and communicate. Needs to be transparent in terms of a view of that adoption and compliance, and aligned with visible KPIs. And BPM effectively provides that platform. And there's a growing resurgence of these well-known principles that is applied now in a much more nimble and exciting way. And I think Vanessa will show you how it's applied using the SAP Signavio environment. Customers want a simple, seamless journey, interacting across various touch points in our operational processes. And historically, most businesses are organized because it makes more sense by function, by geography, by product line. And this builds barriers, which introduces inconsistencies, introduces duplication, inefficiencies, and this to the frustration of the customers. And of course, that's bad for the business. BPM properly implemented provides a transparent view, which breaks down some of these barriers. Vanessa, very difficult slide to add with the dots in it. But anyway, it breaks down the barriers, which provides much greater end-to-end visibility across that value chain and transcends these artificial boundaries and effectively creates a seamless environment that can better serve the customers. So why now? BPM effectively allows businesses to get ahead. It's about businesses that are thriving, it's not just those that come up with new innovation, it's those that are able to get this into the market fast and reliably. End-to-end transparency also removes that duplication, removes redundancy, and increases the quality and efficiency of what happens within the business, and does this sustainably, such that it's a really good for the business, good for the planet, of course, as well. And it's a once-in-a-decade opportunity. Many organizations right now are needing to go through upgrading the ERP. There are many that are moving to S4. And this doesn't happen very often. And it's an opportunity to, instead of doing the same mess for less kind of on a new platform, doing that in a much more streamlined way, much more efficient way around those end-to-end value chains. And ultimately, it's building the resilience and adaptability that allows you to future-proof the organization and allows you to do that more efficiently while potentially even reducing the costs of transformation. So it's that dream that is important right now. And it's that I think some organizations have managed to achieve. And Vanessa will now take you through how this has been done, or how this is done using the SAP Signavio platform. Vanessa.
Thank you very much, Peter, for the introduction. Now I'd like to tell you a bit more about what is Signavio. And let me change slide. The first thing I wanted to share with you is reminding how Signavio is an integral part of our vision at SAP. As you can see, it is well embedded and overarching our product portfolio. And there was a clear decision by SAP to acquire Signavio, that was about 2 years back, to clearly support our customers through their transformation journey and make it more secured, accelerated, but on top is really about aligning business and IT objectives. And just to give you one piece of information on top of it is that actually SAP was actually the biggest Signavio customer before the acquisition. And SAP has been using Signavio to drive and support its own internal transformation that was being led by our CFO. So it was a conscious choice to make this acquisition and make it available to our customers. So Signavio is not just a tool set, it is also about a methodology that has the objective to first help you with reach what we call fast time to insight, which means being able to analyze your processes, understand what's how they are currently being executed, how they're performing, and being able to design them or adapt as needed. And then being able to transition to the IT for the implementation of these processes. And that's what we call the fast time to adapt through maybe less efforts in terms of config testing, but as well supporting the deployment, the adoption, and then opening up to continuous improvement. But let me illustrate that a little further. And let's imagine we're going through a transformation journey. And in this case, let's imagine we are in the early steps, phases of a transformation where you are maybe wanting to scope your project. So you are able here to use one of our components that allows you to access in really a matter of hours a number of indicators, performance indicators, basically visualize how your process is doing, and see information such as, what's the percentage of sales orders that were created manually, or how many overdue items do I have? But you have that all at hand in really a matter of hours. And how does that help you? It would help you in understanding where, in which processes you have maybe most blockers, most issues, and help you identify where you should prioritize your efforts for transformation. That's one thing, but this tool also allows you to filter, slice and dice your data so that you can perform, for instance, internal benchmarking. That's quite powerful in understanding which are your own best practices, or even understanding how your solution, how your process is being used even at configuration item level, such as how are my payment terms being used, and how can I simplify them by analyzing how they're being used. So that is conveying and supporting a reduction in terms of testing efforts, for instance. Okay, so that's how you would use it. You can also explore innovation recommendations and correction recommendations, and that would feed your case to transformation. If I continue, once you're now entering the design phase, let's say, you can tap into our library of standard business content that provides what we call value chains, best practices, industry best practices. And the idea is to facilitate a fit to standard approach instead of the classic fit gap analysis, and accelerate this exercise so that once you have that reference of best practices, let's say, you can then start that work of adapting your processes where needed based on your own context and requirements, so that you can, for instance, compare your as-is process against a best practice. You can compare a best practice with its current execution and see where you may have holes, and that will help you make a decision in terms of what do I want to take from the best practice, or what is important for me to keep from the as-is. But as well, it is the capacity to keep your business repository in sync with, for instance, enterprise architecture. We have quite a strong partnership with LeanIX here, and give you that bigger picture to prepare for transformation. So now if we continue, and let's say you have signed off the business requirements, and we're now ready to hand over to the IT. We have a connector between Signavio and Solman in particular, and that helps with a smooth transition delivery of business requirements to the IT, who will use them to work on their specification for configuration and even testing, by making sure that we're well aligned with business scenarios, basically. And finally, Signavio would support, of course, the deployment through, for instance, the localization of your target state, but of course, the monitoring of the adoption, or the fact that you would use Signavio as a central knowledge base where you can attach additional change management documents to your business repository, so that there is one single entry point for your business community. So that's in a very in very quick terms how Signavio supports the transformation journey. Let me summarize now some key elements regarding our offering wheel, because Signavio is made of several components. So it is first about understanding your processes, whereas it is through a plug and play approach with no configuration, or through a more flexible end-to-end, whereas you execute your processes on SAP or non-SAP solutions, and that's the mining capability. SAP Signavio is about as well improving your processes, whereas we're talking about modeling processes or modeling customer journeys. It is about transforming them by ensuring the right governance around these processes, the right collaboration, or even automation where needed. And the important thing to note here is that even though these elements can work standalone if you wish, they are actually all connected. They're not separated from each other. So you can, compare your reference model with its actual execution, for instance. And now I would like to end this chapter with reminding how well SAP Signavio is integrated to its wider ecosystem, whereas it is SAP in terms of analytical capabilities, change management capabilities, or outside the SAP world with, for instance, enterprise architecture with LeanIX, or even Qualtrics, so that, for instance, you are able to mine your data with customer experience data points. But now let's see how that works in practice. And this is where we would like to share a couple of customer references, customer examples. And I would like to start with phase 0 and share the story of a customer that I have worked with. It's a customer that is a leading luxury group. And in their case, they needed to prepare for their move to S/4HANA. And they were seeing that move as really, a big effort, something a transformation they needed to secure absolutely. It was a critical move that needed to be secured. But as well, they were conscious that they were also needing to re-internalize the SAP knowledge, because they have been relying heavily on partners, and the knowledge of their own processes was in the hands of those partners. So whenever a consultant was leaving the project, the knowledge would go away and they would be left alone with processes partially documented on PPT and already outdated. So that was a problem, and they wanted to make sure that they would capitalize on that knowledge and make sure they would be the owner of their own transformation. And second, they wanted to have more visibility over their overall architecture, whereas it is business, but as well IT. And they knew they had to deal with a landscape with around 600 applications, more than 1,000 interfaces. So they needed to have that visibility. So what did they do? They started working with both SAP Signavio and LeanIX to make sure that business requirements, enterprise architecture were well aligned, to give them that full transparency, the bigger picture, and to give them this visibility, in particular, if I'm talking about processes, they started mining some of their critical processes to understand where they were coming from in order to prepare for their RFP in particular. And they understood how this type of approach would give them a lot of information about the impacts of certain business issues, which they would not have otherwise. Second, they had this, they have engaged in the work of building their target state model and they have been using our standard, our library of standard business content to accelerate that work and hence accelerate the preparation of their RFP for implementation. And third, they were actually building an overall digitalized business repository with governance around it. And just to close on that example, they actually decided to use SAP Signavio as, the red thread, the mandatory tool set to conduct transformation projects and make sure that business requirements were well aligned. And now they're using Signavio as well for other transformation projects happening elsewhere in the group, or even for implementing new business models and make sure they have harmonized processes. So that's it for me. And now I would like to hand over again to Peter.
Yes, thanks, Vanessa. And my example is the phase one, which is managing execution implementation. And I wish I could say that they had followed phase zero. So this is a consumer electronics company where they were going through a separation from a bigger group and putting in place an entirely new technology stack, of which the S4 was a key component. And introducing at the same time a new way of working that was meant to be simpler and harmonized. However, the way that they had started out was sort of a much more traditional approach of working with a more IT-oriented system integrator. And they went through a series of conference room pilots, identifying a whole series of configurations that were required, change orders, etc., and effectively creating that backlog of work that the SI was going to plow through while creating the technical design documents. And that's a very traditional approach, I think, to implementing a SAP in an ERP environment. An enlightened COO, I think, introduced the need for process. However, did that a little bit late. The project was already ongoing, but said we need process. And I think had been told that the SAP Signavio stuff was good and they should get it. I think they had some deal about getting it in place. But he bought the concept, and basically we were involved in helping to mobilize and get this moving. And we created, for the first phase of processes, the end-to-end process, and translated the technical designs that had already been created into the process model, and sort of tried to extract the process landscape from the technical documentation, which is exactly the wrong way around, but that's the way that it happened. And then created a first pass of the processes, which went through a top-down approach of simplifying and improving what the process could look like. Yes, it made some changes to the technical work that was underneath, helped actually in removing some of the configuration and adaptation that had been introduced, but perhaps wasn't required. And this initial disruption allowed the team to put in place a series of models that became the basis for the rest of the implementation and was used through the system testing into the training and the development. In fact, went live a few weeks back, and the adoption is already picking up significantly as a basis for making sure that there is a process lens and a simplified, more harmonized lens on the work that they do. They like this concept, and even the SI, I think, has grudgingly accepted it. And in the later phases, which they're now continuing, they've taken much more of this sort of process-led approach to moving this forward. And ultimately, the second phase has been much cleaner and process first. And I think what it's demonstrated is that it's allowed a very clean connection between IT, the business, and the various parties that are involved in that. accelerated the adoption. We're already seeing an acceptance around the team where they can see what their process landscape looks like, and they can very easily understand how the SAP environment supports that, the S4 environment supports that. And overall, it's reducing the risk of the SAP transformation massively. So it's a great example of how it could be used in the managing and the execution and implementation phase. The final example I have then carries it through into effectively driving out value, driving out the value realization. And this example is a technology company, big tech, basically implementing things like routers, switches, etc., but wanting to do that like the Amazon of the tech industry, wanting to be able to get these things to you fast and furious on the same basis. So if it's ordered by an organization in Singapore, it must deliver the same service as it does in the UK as it does in France. And to make sure that is a consistent way of being able to do it. And what they had done is created sort of the way we work documentation, and through some pain had converted from an old repository tool into the SAP Signavio environment. We helped do that. In fact, moved, I think, some 3,500 models into this world. But it was created around the user such that they were much more likely to adopt it and use it. And they initially then said, well, okay, we need to drive a bit of a carrot and stick approach. The carrot is making sure that they're getting the information they need in a way that they can easily see it. And that was done through the collaboration hub and the ability of people to engage with it, etc. And then they implemented PI as a way of a little bit of the stick, making sure that there was visibility of the KPIs to linked very closely to those processes, and a series of sort of dashboard type widgets, which showed how their performance was racking up compared to their peers in other parts of the globe. So the average cycle time, for example, for the order to cash process, I think, was 18 days. And the CIO said to me, we've got to get that to a day. Well, the chances of getting them down to a day, they've got a much more complex product, or series of products than the Amazon environment have. But they made significant progress in terms of getting visibility of the KPIs, getting this sort of almost competitive spirit working amongst the different peers in such a way that the outliers could be identified and improved. And the net effect was that they've significantly enhanced the implementation, driving consistency, driving adoption, and ultimately driving better performance. Did that initially in OTC, and now I've carried it through into a range of other processes. I think right now it's in 6 different processes: procure to pay, R2R, etc. And it is making a significant difference to the use and adoption of the tool set, the processes, and effectively an integrated whole between the two. And the benefits, of course, are as outlined below. I think the what I call copy to catch up, which is identifying what others in the business are doing, making sure that it's you can see how the performance marries up, improving performance by copying best practice, making that best practice visible and available, and ultimately improving performance. The whole customer experience touch points were clearly identified through the customer journeys and how those touched into the organization, and those could be optimized as well. And the different parts of the organization were delivering to that consistent whole. And the connected data around the process was in one place. They saw the process, they saw the dashboards around their performance against the process, and they saw that all in one place. So a very powerful environment that has demonstrated the value of moving down this route. So those are three examples, and I think what we've tried to do is give you a little bit of the, well, why is this so important? Why is BPM important? And it is important. It's valid now. It's something that is more than just a little bit of technology. It's a whole philosophy around getting that transparency of the way we work and getting a continual building and improvement on it in a very collaborative way. And that ultimately drives value, creates those reusable assets, which allows you to realize real value over time. I hope that we've given you a little bit of insight into that, and we're very open to having further conversations with you. And if you'd like to book some time with anyone from our mutual teams, we'd be very happy to set that up. And I think that was it from a formal perspective, but very happy to answer any questions should those be there. Beatrice, I hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you both for the engaging presentations. So I see that we already have some questions, and please keep them coming. We still have some time to answer them. And yes, Peter, Vanessa, with that, I would hand over to you for answering the questions. You can find them in the Q&A section at the bottom.
Yes, thank you, Beatrice. I see a first question that says, how are working old-fashioned SAP implementation consultants together with process-based methodology and Signavio consultants? Well,
maybe I'll pick that one up, and
yes.
then you get to it, because that's my last case study, or the second case study. Effectively, the SI, and I wouldn't call them old-fashioned. They're a very reputable organization, but they were doing it in a much more technically oriented way. It's just their methodology. Initially, they found this process stuff as being an immense delay to the process. They had a series of conference room pilots set up. They had their order books ready. They had the case, the change orders ready. They were down a path, and they knew what they were doing. And I think they saw this as being a bit of an intervention. Through that first phase, we were able to demonstrate that actually it created clarity of what the business requirements are, in such a way that it made it easier for them to get to their answers and to avoid any rework and change that might come up in later pieces. And I think net, the later phases, I think we have found a way of working together that works quite well. A lot of the SIs that are big SI partners of SAP Signavio, I know are enabling and adopting some of these skills and capabilities, but that was a time coming. Vanessa can perhaps comment on that as well.
Well, yeah, actually it relates exactly to the methodology that I presented earlier, in the sense that we're really putting ourselves in a context of a general move to the cloud, and we sense that there is a need to accelerate this transformation journeys, and this is exactly what we're trying to deliver. And that actually ties up to the second question. So if you allow me to transition, the second question being, how do you support greenfield SAP implementations? And absolutely yes. We support transitions actually, whereas it is greenfield or even brownfield. You would have different levels of impacts on your processes, of course, but in a case of greenfield, this is exactly where you would most benefit from our reference content, business standard content in terms of best practices, value chains, etc. We are even working on templates of embedded visualization of your processes with embedded analytics. And the idea is really to accelerate that journey. You know, we want to move away from very tedious, long-lasting design workshops, but to make everything quicker so that we can concentrate more on where is the value added rather than on putting a lot of efforts in, you know, documenting. Well, the idea is to accelerate that documentation in other things. I don't know, Peter, if you want to add to that.
Yes, I think in greenfield environments, of course, you have the opportunity to be able to shape the approach as you go. I think I was working with an organization that was about to go into the SAP world, I think, and there was a global global standard, a global sort of template that had been identified, and they needed to do it locally, but they were unclear as to whether they should just adopt the standard or what they should do. And we very quickly worked with them to put in place the SAP Signavio environment, to do a high-level discovery of the major end-to-end processes, and within that, identify the 80-20, identify the 20% where they were truly strategically different and why, and what the key requirements were, and making those visible. And so that by the time they got to the global team coming to them and saying, okay, this is what we need to roll out, they could say, great, but in this process area, these are the key things we need for these reasons. And it wasn't just, oh, we do it differently. It was truly based on their strategic priorities. And that helped a lot, both in terms of making sure that they got what they needed for their local market, but also making sure that the other areas were as standard as possible. And by so doing, making it simpler and more globally compliant, et cetera, et cetera. So regardless of where you are on the journey, the approach makes a lot of sense.
Thanks, Peter. Maybe I can take the next question. Is the standard modeling content already available and will stay free of charge and shareable with other platforms? So that library I was referring to is already available to any SAP customer directly for no additional cost. If you are a SAP Signavio customer, it is also, you have access to it with no additional cost. In the future, there will be some additional content, maybe very specific industry content that might become payable, but that is still being defined. So I think we're good with that one.
I'm just picking up another one of the questions, which was, how do you get buy-in from a tech approach to a more process approach? This is always a little bit of a challenge. I think I was working with a utility company, and they wanted to implement the next version of SAP. It wasn't, in fact, S4. It was previously, and the IT guy just said, well, we're going to get out of support. I have to implement this. And he just wanted to put the technology in place, replicating what they had at the moment. What I crudely called same mess for less. But at the end of the day, I managed to convince the CFO that it was about using it as an opportunity to get back to basics. Changing your ERP, you don't do very often. It's one of those rare occasions when you unfreeze the organization as they try and learn the new tool. You want to be able to make sure that you're making the changes to simplify it before it freezes, and it freezes very quickly. Organizations are resilient, and they'll pick up the tool and say, well, okay, this is how we think we should be doing it, and then freeze into an old way of working. And if you want to change it, you've got to change it pretty fast. The CFO got it, And we went through an approach which leveraged best practice, a little bit like Vanessa described earlier on, and managed to implement that change. The tech people were sort of just told to get with it. But as it progressed, they found that rather than it making the process, the approach longer and more costly, actually it made it easier and less costly. And yeah, because you were able to simplify the amount of change that was required to configure the system. Sorry, long answer to a short question, but quite a critical one.
Thanks, Peter. Maybe I can answer quickly. There is a quick one that says, please give more information why the Solman is needed. Can a configuration directly be derived out of the BPM? So we'd say Solman is not mandatory, but we have built a connector with Solman because many of our SAP customers use it to monitor the implementation of the IT part of the SAP part. So we have built that connector that is two-way connector actually. You can also import information from Solman, such as a list of executables. And can a configuration directly be derived out of the BPM? What you would get from BPM, so SAP Signavio, would be the business requirements. You can automatically generate your specifications, your business specifications from Signavio in terms of, what is the business flow from a diagram perspective, but as well from an attributes perspective, and that is being given as an input to the IT. So I hope I have answered the question.
Be able to comment on, Vanessa, but anyway, maybe I'll pick up the next one, which is how does BPM identify or help identify and address potential bottlenecks or challenges in the transformation process before they become bigger issues? Well, like I said, putting this process stuff ahead of the transformation might be seen as being adding complexity and time to the overall implementation. But the reality is that clarifying what that end-to-end process looks like, the end-to-end value chain looks like, clarifying where you truly want to be differentiated and where you don't, is something that needs to be addressed. If you don't address it up front, during the implementation, you address it multi-times over. So if you don't address whether or not you allow a configuration change, whether or not this is the responsibility of a central purchasing function or someone in the region, if you don't sort out those issues up front, during the implementation, they become minor, small, but multiple arguments. And there is no easy answer to them if you haven't got the framework up front. So actually, it simplifies the process throughout and forces you to kind of hold true to an overall vision, which is ultimately simplification, harmonization, while delivering the most effective strategic solution that you can.
Thanks, Peter. And maybe I can comment on the next question, which has also a relationship to it. In real life examples, how have Signavio and BPM been used to reduce the time and effort required to complete a transformation project, as it seems that creating process beforehand might delay the implementation itself, which I'm not sure that defining your processes beforehand is a lack of time, but coming back to how concretely it accelerates time, and I would refer back to a few things I have mentioned earlier. We're talking about first having this real visibility of your processes, and maybe I can give you a more precise example from the first customer case I have shared, which was the customer knew they had an issue in one of their European countries because they were changing warehouse, and that was causing stockouts on the market. So they knew that problem, but what they didn't know was the actual impacts of it. And with an approach with SAP Signavio, they were able to deep dive and understand what were the top rejection reasons, because behind the stockouts, there were orders that were being rejected by the customers and rejected for certain reasons. And we were able to visualize what were the top rejection reasons. We were able to see what were the what were most products being rejected. And so that was giving already a very fine visibility over what was happening, and hence, naturally, how to change that. But as well, if you speak about how you model your target state, Signavio comes with a number of features that help you accelerate. So I mentioned already those reference best practices that you can just import and use it as a starting point and then just adapt. But then you have as well some other features, such as what we call the quick modeling tool, that allows you to model a process as if you were on an Excel sheet. So you know what attributes you have to complete for each activity, and you simply fill it in. So that allows to go much faster than the old drawing tools that you might have experienced. And last option, in some cases, you may want to simply retro document some of your as-is processes because they're either critical or they're still applicable. So with a mining approach, you can visualize the most representative path of your process and choose to simply retro document it by simply clicking on a button that would generate the BPM-N diagram. So those are a few examples. And then I want to give you one last example, which is the impact it has on the build phase. And we have customers that have been first analyzing the process to see where they could simplify it, so as to reduce the number of test scenarios. So that was having a direct impact on the test effort. So I will end that. We can, of course, always continue, but unless, Peter, you want to add on that.
No, I think that's fine. That's fine. I was going to pick up briefly on the next question, which is the relationship between the modules. Now, I think I'll leave you to answer the rest of SAP and its linkage. I'm not particularly expert at that, but in terms of the SAP Signavio relationship with sort of other BPM tools, at the end of the day, it is a suite, and they put a lot of effort into that suite. And that's more than just a good sales message. Having used it a lot and used other tools quite a lot. There's a recent client I'm working with. Actually, they've chosen to move away from one of the leading process mining tools into the SAP Signavio suite. And the reason they've chosen that is, at the end of the day, process mining is not just about being able to give you good information in a very cool format. It is about being able to identify insights and translate that insight into action. And the translating the insight into action is about making it easily visible to the average business user and being able to relate it to the process and the process models. And so getting the insight information in the collaboration hub is exciting. And once you've got it there and you've identified where there might be improvements required, to be able to then link to the simulation tool and say, well, what might the benefit of that be? And to be able to, so the linkages between the different tool sets are really exciting about how to make a difference with it. And it is the suite as opposed to point functionality. You can get geek excitement about point functionality, but that doesn't make business change. And business change is about being able to drive real improvement from it.
Thanks, Peter. And maybe to give a few short answer to the first part of the question about the integration to the rest of the SAP modules, it was called, but I would say the SAP ecosystem. We are making sure that we're well integrated in terms of, well, as you could see, with the IT part, with Solman, with the change management through Enable Now, with also a wide range of integration capabilities, especially for mining purposes. And we rely, we can go through our SAP Data Intelligence, which already provides a lot of off-the-shelf connectors. So with always the same objective of making things easy to implement and fast to execute. I don't know if we can take maybe one last question.
Maybe I'll pick up the last one because I get quite passionate about that. I mean, at the end of the day, I think when I was writing a book on process management, McGraw-Hill said to me, sorry, the question is, implementing BPM is, to my experience, much more than implementing new methods and tools. It requires company culture to get transformed in parallel, et cetera, et cetera. And I was saying, McGraw-Hill said to me, okay, this BPM thing sounds like a lot of fun, it's very topical, but write on a page, just one page, describe what's in this book, but don't use the word process. Well, I don't know if you've ever tried to write about process management without using the word process, but it's not straightforward. But it did force me to think about what this is in reality. And ultimately, I define process as this is what we do. And if you want to change process, actually what you're saying is you want to change what we do. And that's what people do on a daily basis. And that needs a change in culture and a focus on change management, as much as it is a focus on process management. And it's not just the engineering of cool pictures and diagrams and painting of documents, as he calls it in the question. So it is about making sure that you can make that happen. It's not straightforward. The average executive doesn't necessarily buy that because they've seen these process models and say, well, how does process model make an ounce of difference to my business? What you've got to do is focus on the method, the approach that goes with it, and the whole focus on change management that lies aside it. And that's a whole lot more than I can address, in the time that we've got now. But it's a really exciting part of what real process management is about, leveraging the tools. And when you focused on implementing something like S4, you have the opportunity of changing the automated aspects of the process, but also the manual and physical aspects of the process. And it's getting that aligned approach to moving the what we do forward that's going to make a real difference. Sorry, long answer to a long question. Okay. But I think we're probably just about out of time as well. Vanessa, I don't know if there's anything else you want to.
No, I think we're good. And Beatrice,
Yes, we have only a few more minutes, so we can also answer these questions after the webcast. I could give you 2 more before closing. If you wanted to take the last ones.
Maybe we could answer.
The first one, and you take the second one. So yeah. I think in terms of compliance and regulatory requirements, and it says, how does SAP Signavio help organizations ensure compliance and regulatory requirements are met? I think when defining the end-to-end process, clearly you can highlight where the compliance and control requirements are. And as such, it is a whole lot easier to ensure that that is met and able to measure that using the various PI tools, etc. So by having and part of the organization focused on what those regulatory requirements are, you can make sure that they're properly built into the process and highlighted as being key regulatory requirements, and even referenced back to the process. So you can get visibility, which allows it to be done. Typically, I've seen this done in a parallel universe, maybe in Excel or something else separate. And it can be done as an integrated part of the tool, which means that everyone is looking at one source of the truth, and that's the excitement of it.
Thanks. And for the last question, I can give a couple of references. Do you support automatic testing, enhancement of trainings, or agile working? For testing, I'm thinking of one connector we have with one of our partners, Tricentis. And Tricentis is a tool that allows to read BPMN diagrams, processes, and create automatic test scripts and automated execution of testing. So there we have a nice integration that would help with the automation of testing. And on the enhancement of trainings, what I'm thinking of is how you can use SAP Signavio as, on one side, a way to reduce the effort in training, because depending on the complexity of your process, you can consider that some of your process already documented on Signavio is enough for the users to simply consume and understand by, connecting to Signavio and reading them through. But it can support as well in the sense that you can link up your business process diagrams with additional or complementary change management content, whereas it is more step-by-step documentations or videos. So you can have a number of different media to link up and complement on business processes. So that's what I was thinking of. And I would end here.
Great. Thank you so much. We got all the questions answered. And yeah, with that, I would love to thank all of the participants, for everyone who sent in their questions, especially to you, Vanessa and Peter, for your presentations and answering those questions. As mentioned at the beginning, we'll send a recording of the webcast to you over the next days. And finally, I have a small request. After we finish the webcast, there will be a feedback form. It only takes a few minutes, but it helps us to improve the webcast. And yeah, would really appreciate your input. And yeah, with that, I wish you all a lovely day. Hope to see you again in our upcoming webcast. And with that, goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and thanks for the time. Yeah.